So what if an entire generation started to see the government not just as a government, but as something more? Something almost like a god. It's a pretty provocative idea, right? Well, that's the central argument of an article we're breaking down today called The Boomer's God. And believe it or not, the whole thing starts with a story about a kid, a prank, and a wooden paddle.
Okay, so let's set the scene. Picture it. The year is 1967. You've got the summer of love happening, all this cultural change in the air. But the author wants us to ignore all that for a second and zoom way into one single, sweltering classroom.
The air is just thick and hot. There's a fan overhead, but it's not really doing much. And sitting at his desk is this 12-year-old kid who's sweating, but not just from the heat. See, he just pulled a classic kid prank. He loaded the blackboard eraser up with chalk dust.
So the teacher grabs the eraser and, poof, a huge cloud of white dust just explodes everywhere. The whole class goes dead silent. And then she asks the question. It doesn't take long to figure out who the culprit is. But his punishment, it's not just after-school detention. Oh no, it's a trip to the principal's office. And this isn't his first rodeo. He knows this isn't just about getting a lecture. He knows exactly what's waiting for him because he's seen it before, hanging right there on the principal's wall. He is staring down the instrument of his own punishment. And the author is incredibly specific about this thing. It's not just some ruler. We're talking about a piece of wood that's 3 feet long and 4 inches wide. The handle is even wrapped in electrical tape, for a better grip. The principal's door clicks shut. And then comes the sound.
Now this is where the personal story pivots to the article's first huge point. A government employee, which is what a principal is, physically disciplining a child wasn't some big scandal. It was normal. Just as normal as that same government lining kids up in the school cafeteria to give them inoculations. It was just accepted, no questions asked.
So that really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Why? Why was this kind of absolute authority from the government just a fact of life? Well, according to the author, to find the answer, you don't look at the boomers themselves. You have to look at their parents.
The author calls this period the Age of Trust, and its roots, he argues, are planted firmly in the biggest, most defining event of the 20th century, World War II.
So the thinking goes like this. You had 11 million men serve in the Second World War. For years, they were trained to trust the chain of command, to follow orders without question for the sake of survival. When they came back home, that mindset didn't just vanish. It basically got transferred. The trust they had in their commanding officers became trust in the government, in the news media. What they said was, for the most part, taken as fact.
And all of this deep, foundational trust is what sets the table for the article's main event, the big, controversial claim that gives the whole piece its name.
And here it is. The central thesis is that, for the baby boomer generation, the government basically took the place of God. Now, to be clear, we're not talking about a literal religious thing. It's a metaphor for an all-knowing, all-powerful force that set the rules, provided the answers, and really defined reality for millions of people.
Okay, that's a huge idea. But what does a government god actually look like in the real world? How does that change how people actually live their lives? Well, the article gives a few really specific examples.
For starters, it changes our language. The author points to all these new terms that came out of government studies and economic departments, things like GDP or psychological terms like ADHD. These weren't just clinical labels anymore. They became the words that everyday people use to understand their world, their health, their society. And you can see this shift in very real, tangible ways. The purpose of raising kids, the author suggests, shifted from being about family and community to being about creating a productive economic unit. Where you got your food changed, too. It went from canning and buying from the local farm to trusting the big grocery store and the government's official food pyramid to tell you what's healthy.
And at the end of the day, the argument is that this changed the very definition of a person. Your identity, your value, it all became tied up in your job, your contribution to the economy. Or in the really stark words of the author, people became economic units on a spreadsheet.
So the big question is, why? How did this happen? Was this some kind of evil, top-down conspiracy? The author's answer is actually, no, not at all. It was a trade, a great trade-off.
The government essentially stepped in and took on all the roles that used to belong to your family, your church, your local community. It became the ultimate parent, the main employer,
The doctor, the banker, even the therapist and the pastor. For almost any problem you had, the government now had a program or an answer.
And this is the author's final, crucial point. This wasn't something forced on people. It was an exchange, and a welcome one at that. People traded that old sense of autonomy for something they wanted more: freedom. Freedom from the messy, difficult obligations of close family and tight-knit communities.
It's a really powerful and, yeah, a pretty controversial theory about how our modern world took shape. But it absolutely leaves us with a critical question for today. If that was the boomers' God, who or what do we put our trust in now? And more importantly, what trade-offs are we making, maybe without even realizing it?